Chinese President Xi Jinping is urging countries to do more to support developing nations when it comes to fighting climate change, calling for concrete actions and realistic targets. That's part of the message the president delivered to the COP26 conference. Hello, I'm Arnold Naidu, and this is The Heat. COP26 is well underway in Glasgow, Scotland. World leaders have a huge task on their hands as the G20 summit did not prove to be fruitful on consensus about net zero emissions. Can nations come together to preserve the planet and future generations? We begin with this report from CGTN's Andrew Wilson.
It's a gathering of world leaders that no other conference can match. More than 120 nation states, some of them fresh from a G20 summit that has already been declared a disappointment. The world's largest economies failed to collectively commit to a unanimous zero carbon target, failed to show a decisive intention to turn their backs on coal or fossil fuels, only to recognize the importance of the issues. Hosting the conference, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson couldn't hide his frustration.
I was there in Paris 6 years ago when we agreed to net zero and to try to restrain the rise in the temperature of the planet to 1.5 degrees. And all those promises will be nothing but blah, 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 to coin a phrase. And the anger and the impatience of the world will be uncontainable.
And nor could the UN Secretary General.
And it's time to say enough. Enough of brutalizing biodiversity. Enough of killing ourselves with carbon. Enough of treating nature like a toilet. Enough of burning and drilling and mining our way deeper. We are digging our own graves.
The conference is packed. 20,000 is the number being quoted. That's brought logistical difficulties, but it also means these important people, including President Macron of France, have to run the gauntlet of journalists and activists wherever they go. The Chinese President Xi Jinping is not attending the conference, but in a written message he talked of upholding a multilateral consensus, the need to focus on concrete actions and accelerate the green transition. China, he said, will continue to prioritize ecological conservation and pursue a green and low-carbon path to development. Thank you. On this first real day, delegates also heard from the US President himself.
To state the obvious, we meet with the eyes of history upon us and the profound questions before us. It's simple. Will we act? Will we do what is necessary? Will we seize the enormous opportunity before us? Or will we condemn future generations to suffer?
And from the President of Ecuador, the promise to hugely expand the marine reserve around the Galapagos Islands. In my lifetime, he says, I felt the temperatures rise, and nowadays we all notice the lack of rain. The lack of commitment among the G20 was a blow, but the delegates from the smaller countries, many of them already feeling the impact of climate change, still understand that this is the venue for them to apply the pressure. This is, as has already been publicly said, their last best chance. Andrew Wilson, CGTN, Glasgow.
Okay, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from San Francisco is Ted Nace. He is the Executive Director of the Global Energy Monitor. From London, Leo Horn-Phathanothai is the head of the World Resources Institute UK office. From Ann Arbor, Michigan is Barry Rabe. He is a professor of environmental policy at the University of Michigan. And from Beijing, Jianyu Zhang is the executive director of the BRI Green Development Institute. Welcome to all of you. And Jianyu Zhang, let me start with you. As I said, China's President Xi Jinping has issued a statement to the COP26 meeting. In that statement, he calls for multilateral consensus, concrete actions, and green transition. If we look a bit into the detail of that, he says multilateralism is the right prescription. On concrete actions, he says visions will only come true when we act on them. Parties need to honor their commitments. And on green transition, he says it's important to harness innovations in science and technology to transform and upgrade our energy and resources sectors. So, Jianyu, Zhang, looking at those three broad messages that the Chinese president had to COP26, how does it fit in with China's strategy to combat climate change?
Well, I think that certainly China has been upholding this principle from the very beginning: common but differentiated responsibility. But also, China has been upgrading its own commitment, both domestically and internationally. Domestically, China surprised the world the year before, announcing its own carbon neutrality goal. And also, just exactly 1 year later, China announced that it will stop financing coal-fired power plants overseas. I think both strong commitments that followed with actions would really fit into not China's pledge to the world, but also China's own commitment domestically in this green transition.
Ted Nace, according to your organization, the Global Energy Monitor, more than 90% of the 195 coal plants being built in Asia right now are being built in Asia, I should say. Now, we have India, which is heavily dependent on coal. It's just announced it plans on net zero emissions by 2070. There's also the United States President Biden, who's been talking about net zero in the United States, but at the same time, there's a spending bill currently sitting in Congress, which has $20 billion in it for fossil fuel development. I mean, we're getting mixed messages from leaders. Is it realistic to think that they could get to net zero in the time that they are talking about?
Not the way things are going. There's been tremendous improvement in the economics of renewable energy, and there has been a lot of momentum away from coal worldwide. But the rate at which the world is moving toward renewables is not at all anywhere close to what's necessary to protect the world from really dangerous climate change.
Leo, China has made a big push towards embracing a green economy, relying on renewable sources of energy. What is your assessment of how the rest of the world is doing towards moving to sustainable means of getting energy, moving towards green economies?
Thank you for having me. That's a very good question. The simple answer is no country currently in the world has demonstrated the change that is needed in order to stick with 1.5 degrees, which is what the science tells us is needed. What that requires is a halving of emissions by 2030. We have 10 years to slash our emissions by half, and we're currently on track with all the commitments that have been put on the table. We're on track to increase our emissions by about 16%. Even taking into consideration announcements that were made at the G20. So the reality is that we're wildly off track, but we are at a good starting point in terms of this decade's action, in that we are seeing proof in the pudding of the Paris Agreement mechanism working, in that there is a drumbeat for more ambition, and countries are coming forth with more ambitious NDCs. And we still need to see how this plays out, but I would say that the fact that we are seeing this pressure on countries to up their ambition is in itself an indication that the Paris Agreement is working.
Barry Rabe, the number we keep hearing, 1.5 degrees Celsius, that's what these conferences are meant to do, to get countries to keep that temperature rise below that. But looking at current efforts and the warnings we have seen from a number of organizations that have released reports over the past few months, are those targets going to be reached?
1.5 degrees really does appear to be quite a stretch. If you look at what is on the table in terms of commitments, but also more significantly follow-through policies, as of right now, it's hard to add that up and see how we shift toward a path back to 1.5 as opposed to something higher, potentially something much, much higher, barring some major transformation or major breakthrough in the remaining days at Glasgow, or major advances by a few of the larger nations. 1.5, again, is a tremendous goal, but it seems more aspirational rather than something we're actually going to be able to realistically achieve.
Well, if you look at, one of the numbers I've been hearing is that it possibly could be, by the turn of the century, it could be more than 2.5 degrees. What would the practical impact of that be on the planet?
I think the higher you go, the greater the challenges begin to emerge in every possible dimension of climate. It's not just simply lifting of localized temperatures, but sea level issues, resource issues and resource depletion, substantial droughts. It does not affect any two nations in identical ways, but when you begin to add all of those factors up, 1.5 presents its own significant challenges. But as you keep rising, as you keep going above that level in the coming decades, the impacts are really quite considerable. And in some ways, really hard to know with confidence, other than they could be quite challenging and severe, particularly for those nations that would face the most intensive changes within their own boundaries or within their own regions and have the fewest resources to deal with some of the challenges of adaptation and the like.
Jianyu, Zhang, delegates to the COP26 are talking about their respective countries' targets. Every leader is going there and saying, this is my plan, this is what I plan to do. But these are voluntary efforts. And I'm wondering if the big flaw in this is that it can't really be enforced, can it?
Well, I think there's two parts of that. One part of that, if you dial back 6 years ago in Paris, I think what people agree is these NDCs, nationally determined contributions. But there's one other important aspect to that, is this whole ratchet mechanisms that you can only go forward, not backward. And you do this all 5 years review. That's what Glasgow is doing, and you submit your enhanced NDCs. That's part of that. I certainly agree. I think there is a lacking of global enforcement mechanism to make sure countries do what they promise to do. And I think that's what President Xi referred to in his second point, that if you look at all the promises, because this is the whole package, not just the reduction target, there's also the finance, there's the technology, there's international cooperation. But I think just simply zooming in the target itself will not help. And that also is not really in the spirit of the Paris Agreement in its entirety.
Leo, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, could we see some kind of enforcement mechanism being attached to any kind of agreement, some kind of teeth in the agreement?
Well, the premise of the Paris Agreement was that you can't have a punitive regime that is top-down enforced from the UN. That will not it does not reflect the world that we live in. And so the theory of change underpinning the Paris Agreement is that you need to meet countries where they are, and that as time goes by and as the pressure for action increases, that there is a groundswell for action. And we are actually seeing signs of that, although I will agree with my colleagues that action is not nearly at the pace or the scale that we need to see it. But the real core of to answer your question, the theory of change is about building accountability and transparency, so that the commitments that countries make, which they're bound to under the Paris regime, so they're voluntary agreements, but the countries are bound to them. And there are in countries where the rule of law is strong, you can see a whole judiciary and legal legislative embedding of these commitments in ways that then constrain governments to deliver on their commitments. So there's a body pressure, there's a legitimacy, the mandate, and also the legislative regulatory mechanisms that then follow.
Right. So it's a national effort then, country by country.
Well, the UN FCCC, which is the body which is convening the parties, the countries to right now, is an intergovernmental body.
Right.
And so the unit of action is countries. But what we're seeing also, and I would say a lot of the exciting action that we're seeing at this COP is the non-parties, what they are doing as part of what is known as the Marrakesh Partnership Process. Mm-hmm. And we've seen already through the non-state actors a real surge of commitment from over 1,000 cities making commitments to net zero in line with the 1.5 degree goal. We've seen the financial sector really step up in a big way with asset owners representing 77% of the world's assets under management making commitments to net zero. So there's a real, although it is a state intergovernmental process, we're seeing a lot of momentum and action also from the non-state actors that is injecting ambition into the process.
Ted Nace, let's look at some of the main COP26 goals. Phasing out coal, trying to bring an end to deforestation, switching to electric vehicles, and encouraging investment in renewables. I mean, are we seeing any kind of comprehensive plan being put forward where we could see these goals being met?
Well, the optimistic message is that there is absolutely nothing technological or economic that's standing in the way of completely solving the problem. And the basic mechanism for solving the problem is to first clean up the electrical sector and then to electrify every sector. So the good news is that momentum is growing for getting rid of coal, which is the dirtiest way of producing electricity, the most carbon intensive. Right now, the economics of renewables are vastly better than coal. It's just a question of how fast we can replace this dirty infrastructure with clean infrastructure. So the people of the world should feel really good. We have all the tools in place to do it. And what we really need to do is we just need to increase the pace. And that is going to require action by all elements of society, government, business, financial sector. So all of these sectors are mobilizing. Right now, the financial sector, over $5 trillion has been committed towards renewables. Over 130 financial institutions have committed to no longer financing coal, and 44 governments have now committed to build no more coal, and 40 more countries have stopped building coal altogether. So we have progress from all elements of society, and we just need to go faster.
Barry, Rabe, talking about money, do you see the money coming forward to implement some of the changes that are being talked about?
Money appears to be hard to come by, particularly if it crosses over national boundaries. We're seeing a growing willingness in many nations, including many advanced economies, to spend more than ever before to support some of the very transitions that Ted was talking about. I do think to a large extent the reluctance to spend that money goes up when it's going to be transferred somewhere else or given away. That's going to be a huge challenge for the United States, but also other nations. What are the terms of that bringing in a larger network of nations? This is also, though, an area where we are probably seeing private sector institutions, large banks, nonprofits, others who are able to raise or access funds, perhaps even eclipsing some of the traditional roles of government, where in the governmental case, the political pressure is so much focused on localized spending, it's hard to share that bounty or hard to share that larger body of revenue with other jurisdictions.
Leo, one of the other COP26 goals is collaboration. We've heard a lot about that. We'd heard that from the Chinese president as well. Here is Britain's David Attenborough talking about it. Let's listen.
If working apart, we are a force powerful enough to destabilize our planet, surely working together, we are powerful enough to save it. In my lifetime, I've witnessed a terrible decline. In yours, you could and should witness a wonderful recovery.
My apologies, that was Richard Attenborough, not David Attenborough. Leo, how important is cooperation and multilateralism, as we heard from the Chinese leader earlier, in combating climate change? Everybody's got to pull in the same direction.
Well, this is a collective action problem, so it is absolutely at the core of the response that is needed. And in one of the things that will be one of the benchmarks of success for COP26 is going to be in the ability of the presidency to rebuild trust in the process. And that goes through, it's been a difficult year with a lot of intensity around the COVID vaccines and vaccine inequity, undermining trust in international affairs. This trust needs to be rebuilt, and that goes through, firstly, money being put on the table in the form of the $100 billion that was pledged, promised by developed countries, to assist developing countries in meeting their climate targets. And this was a goal that has not yet been met by the 2020 deadline. There's still time to make up for the gap in financing, but that is going to be an absolutely crucial condition for rebuilding trust in the process, so that we can get to that kind of collective action that is needed.
Jianyu, Zhang, earlier on, Leo was telling us about the non-state actors who are playing a huge role in COP26. I mean, if there's one thing that distinguishes this global battle, it is the involvement of young people. Let's listen to one young climate activist.
Across Africa, there have been floods, wildfires, heat waves, severe droughts, and more. This is our reality. Africa is suffering. Our people are suffering. We need serious action. World leaders need to turn their words, their empty promises into action.
So what do you make of the involvement of young people in this fight against climate change? And do you think they can bring sufficient pressure on political leaders and world leaders to effect change?
Yeah, sure, I do. And I think young people not only represent the party that's going to be severely affected by if there's non-action today, but also I think they can and should play a much more active role in helping the world to come together in this global fight. Actually, we have been seeing lots of encouraging signs of people of all color and all nationality, young age, come to focus on this issue. I believe there is a global university climate alliance that is having non-stop meetings. Tsinghua University is the party from China participate in this, organizing online and offline seminars, workshops, trying to really mobilize the universities around the globe to attract young people's attention to this conference. Even their action may not be that as significant in the decision-making process right now, but I think the enthusiasm and the activism that they can bring into this will certainly help to pave the road to the ultimate success that we are all hoping for.
Ted Nace, if we listen to some of the young activists who are in Glasgow right now, they talk about the need for more education on renewable energy, on the climate crisis. And that, of course, also raises the question of whether more is being done in schools right now. What's your view on that?
I just think this generation is so exciting. The passion that we see, the volunteers that come to our organization. And, one of the things I think about all this young energy is that it has felt, if you talk to young people, they have felt that there's a power structure that's kept them down. 20 years ago, the leading corporations were all large oil companies, but that's no longer the case. And the oil companies have lost their status as the linchpin of the economic system. Most of the corporate world now are companies that have no stake in continuing the dominance of fossil fuels. And so we have this situation, this beautiful situation really, where the CEOs of all these large corporations have kids too. And those kids want the same kids that the kids around the world want. And so those CEOs should mobilize now. They have no reason not to. They have no financial stake in continuing the fossil economy. So, earlier we talked about how all the parts of society have to mobilize. That's the corporate sector, young people, the educational system. There's really only a very small fraction of the world's economic interests that any longer have a stake in continuing the madness of fossil fuels. And so all those people who are on the sidelines now, if they're the CEO of a company that has nothing to do with fossil fuels, it's time for those parts of society to mobilize, to join with each other in their sector, across sectors, internationally. I mean, this problem can be solved. We have the tools, we have the economics, all those things are on our side. Young people are kind of like the flame that's really motivating us, all of us, of every age, to really get off the sidelines and do something.
Leo, we are seeing even very young people showing a level of awareness that we have not seen before. I mean, let's listen to this. It's from a 9-year-old. Let's listen.
I think that the world leaders should tell everybody about what to do, like power up on plants or use less energy or educate yourself and others, shop wisely and conserve water, because these are like some of the most important things that we can do to save our planet from climate change.
So there's a very young person there, Leo, calling for this battle to be intensified, the battle against climate change. But that young person also raises another question. That's something that we hear very often, this dilemma that politicians talk about, how to implement meaningful measures while at the same time not endangering economic growth. We, of course, hear a lot of that in the United States. But both can be done, couldn't they?
Absolutely, and I would argue that you can't have one without the other. Mm-hmm. And I'm not alone saying this. We've convened a group of leading growth economists around the world, including Nobel laureates, as well as politicians, leaders of major businesses in what's called the Global Commission on the Economy and the Climate. And they have basically developed the evidence and that shows very clearly that there is an opportunity, an economic opportunity in ambitious climate action. And we're not talking about incremental tag-ons to growth as usual. We're talking about systemic change of the drivers of our economy. We're talking about decarbonizing transport. We're talking about decarbonizing our food systems, transforming our food systems, transforming our cities, the way they're built, the way they're run. So these are transformative systemic change agendas, and embedded in these agendas are profound economic opportunities in the tune of trillions of dollars that are on the table to be had if countries move into the new economy.
Barry, Rabe, I've just got a little bit of time left, less than 30 seconds. What is your best case scenario for what comes out of COP26?
It strikes me that there really are some possibilities for brokering arrangements, creating more ambitious plans. One of the things that actually excites me about this COP, as opposed to others, is that the non-carbon greenhouse gases like methane are on the table in ways we have never seen before. President Biden has advanced a global methane challenge. There are more than 30 nations that have agreed. There are some real possibilities here, given technology and the like, to make far-reaching advances in a relatively short period of time for a greenhouse gas that has very intensive near-term impacts. Its first decades in the atmosphere. Right. That one alone is exciting.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.